Hello again, guys. This is part 2 of our little demo here. It is literally just a pause and a start from the video I just did, so it feels like no gap for me, whereas you guys might watch the first part and get your first lab started out and then get the next part rolling here with this video. So I have not done anything since the last video. We're going to go ahead and pop into our nav bar now, and I'm going to paste in our bootstrap nav bar here. And as you guys know, in React, you can't have the attribute class in JSX. You have to have class name, which is a huge pain to deal with. There we go. Converted them all these classes to say the word class name. And these anchor tags you don't want ultimately, but for now we're just going to let them sit there, and you'll probably see a warning inside of your console log or your terminal as you guys are coding along with me here. It'll say some of these things don't make sense from a JSX standpoint, and they don't, but it'll clear things up as we continue on with these guys, right? So let's check out what we got. See, there's the errors I was talking about. It doesn't like the href attributes, but nevertheless, it's still rendering our nav bar correctly here. That's the important part. Cool. So now we got that wired up. Let's start building out some of our functionality here. Ultimately, the demo I'm going to have for my nav bar to start out with is one home route. We're going to end up doing 2 API calls on 2 different components, one of which will actually go into a more individualized component. Let's start with the simple one at first. So I actually have a site I found and ended up using called JSON placeholder. It is nothing different than our Ghibli Heroku app API here. This Ghibli Heroku app API exposes some endpoints to get films and get people and things like that, and this fake data website does the same thing. It has JSON placeholder.typecode.com/albums or /photos or /users, things like that. It has this as a response, which is just like the Ghibli one, right? If we went to Ghibli/films, we get a list of films that have some information with them on this side, right? It's the same thing in my JSON placeholder. This is just doing a demo with a separate API so you guys can begin to understand how to start thinking about these problems that you're presented with APIs and routing and their proper solutions. So it has /posts, meaning it's like a comment chain or a post chain or something like that, and each post has a title and has a body. It has a user ID that made the post, and it has its unique ID. That's what the one we want to see is ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and it just increments by 1 all the way down to 100. I think this guy had. Yeah, 100. So it's 100 posts, as you can see, with like some lorem ipsum inside of it. That's all it is. Nothing too magical here. So we're actually going to use that. So let's see. I'm going to be doing some converting here, so hopefully you guys can follow along. My very first link, it will say posts, because that's what this will be fetching, and that's where I want it to go to ultimately. We don't want to use anchor tags, and we're going to switch these to links, but for now, let's make sure it actually works as expected. So I'm actually going to create a new component, and I'm going to call it posts.jsx. And as you can imagine, we're going to do my favorite thing, which is wiring up a test app real quick, or a test JSX component here. Return some JSX. Oops, sorry, I smacked my mic there. I meant to scratch my nose. Hello from posts. Export default posts like that. Back on our app.jsx, we're gonna keep home for now, but we're gonna remove not home, and we're gonna import posts from this directory /posts. And then we're gonna change this to say posts. This says not home. We can leave it at that if we want. It doesn't really matter, but we'll give it the name posts just to be very pragmatic about what's happening. So it's still going to start on home, and we're going to have to navigate to posts and how to test this. So instead of saying hello from home, this will say something else. We're going to do something like, I don't know, use the nav bar to navigate to your desired page. Cool. So moving this, there we go. Use the nav bar to navigate your desired page. That's what our home route says, and we actually want to click on this and navigate to post, which currently, as you can see, it doesn't, right? So how are we going to wire this up? Well, back in our nav bar, this is where we have to convert our anchor tags into what are called link tags. And that's how our router knows where it's supposed to go. So we're going to import brackets link from React Router DOM, like so. Booyah. Now we have access to link in here. And essentially all we're doing is going to convert this A tag to say link. It's going to close with a link. And unlike a anchor tag, it doesn't have an href that it goes to. It has something else called a to. And this to is the exact same route that you programmed up here. So if this link is going to post, it needs to go to, you guessed it, /posts, like so. And while I'm here, I'm actually going to go ahead and convert this guy up here, our link that says navbar, or rather our anchor tag that says navbar, and I'm going to convert it to take us actually back to the home route when we click this little guy that says navbar in our application. So going back to here, refresh the page, make sure we're all good. Let's test this. Navbar goes home, posts go to the post page, right? Now we are programmed, and look at the URL bar as well. It's also navigating correctly, and we're navigating and rendering the correct components. Cool. This is React Router DOM in a nutshell. I mean, from here on out, the API stuff is exactly the same thing you did in the last lab. I'll go a bit further to show how to do some router params with you guys, but for the most part, nothing from this point on is nothing you haven't seen. So you can probably jump around a little bit in the video to find where I start working on individual posts. But for now, we now have our navbar inside of our router. It has link tags that are hooked up to our router, and those link tags can actually take us to the component routes that we want to go to. And at its simplest, that's all it is. That's all it's doing. Dope. Great work so far. So let's go ahead and start filling this guy out. As you guys know, you typically get an array of objects as an API response. They don't have to be, but a lot of people do format them that way. And in order to do that before the component mounts, we're going to need access to lifecycles, which aren't available in a functional component like this. We're going to have to do some upgrading, I call it. We're going to class post instead of a const. It's no longer going to be a function, but it's going to be a class that extends react.component, like so. Every component is required to have a render no matter what, so render will wrap our return statement like this. And we have now successfully upgraded post to a class-based component. And checking out our page here, it's still loading and rendering the word post correctly, meaning that we haven't broken anything yet, surprisingly for me. So I know we're going to need access to state, so we're going to need a constructor. With this dot state. And eventually we're going to get some posts that'll be an array of some kind. And we'll get to how to do that in just a second. So components. Remember I told you guys will mount and did mount would be probably your most two often used ones. I'm going to throw in a will mount here just for fun. And this will mount is going to be making a fetch call to a URL string of some kind. Again, this will be coming from here. Add that there like so. Sorry, I was looking at Discord to see if you guys had asked any questions while I was recording these, but it doesn't look like it. Okay, cool. Anyway, so now this is the URL for the API. Well, in y'all's case, it'll probably be something like, what's it called? The Heroku, the Ghibli Heroku app one, but I'm doing a demo API instead. So this fetch is going to make a fetch request to that. And then we're going to have to do something with that response no matter what it is. And as Tyler demoed to you guys last week, we have to JSON the response that we're getting from that response data stream. Then whatever that response is, we're going to make the assumption it's going to be an array of posts. And then we can do whatever the posts are will be this dot set state. And we're going to set posts is equal to posts, which is some ES6 stuff right here. So instead of having to write something like that, post is equal to posts, because the property and the value are the same thing. And again, this post corresponds to this one up here. This post corresponds to this local one right here, which is a JavaScript object or whatever the response was. But because these two words are the same, we can actually remove the second one and the colon and just have it say that. And in case there's an error, it is always great practice to catch it and console log it in some form or fashion. There we go, just so if I do mess up or something happens, I call myself an idiot in my own console log, and I'm like, who wrote this? Oh, I did. Nothing like some self-deprecating humor, right? So now that we have done this component will mount, we can do something else down here in our JSX. I'm going to go ahead and bring in some bootstrap stuff that I like to use, mainly our class name of container fluid, like so. And we're going to need a div again. Thank you. This div is going to have a class name of row. And from there, we're going to call some kind of JavaScript work here. So you can do this inline in here by saying this.state.post.map, or you can move it up to a helper function if you want, which is what I personally like doing. So we're going to do that real quick. I'm going to say render posts, just some generic name that's going to define what it's going to do. It's going to return something because it's a function of this.state.posts, which is our array of posts here. It's going to map through these guys. And a map is an array method that takes one or two arguments. Two are optional, one's required. And the first one is something we define whatever our temporary element is called. So we have an array of posts, which is multiple. So one element inside of the post array is technically called one post singular, which will have an anonymous arrow function here like so, our brackets. And this also, because it's an anonymous function, needs to return some JSX, otherwise we won't render anything. And just as an absolute quick little test here, if I do the word test like so, and now that this guy is correctly wired up and running, we can call it down here by saying this.renderPosts, invoke it. Let's see what we got. Test, 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 test. So theoretically, there should be 100 of these guys since that's what the response is. So we know that's working. And you guys have probably all seen this by this point. You get this warning about having a key property on JSX elements, which we'll go through in just a second here. Cool. So now I know the array is being called in state correctly because we're getting test to appear all these times. But that's obviously not what we want to do, so we want to actually have something a bit cooler than that. So I'm going to create a component so I can start breaking this stuff out. I could code the entirety of the component in this return right here, but I don't want to. I want to do it in another JSX component called post card or something like that, JSX. This guy, we're going to again start as a functional component like so. Nope, nope, nope. This will take some props because we're going to be passing down props of each post to it. I'm going to go ahead and before I forget to go ahead and export this sucker. It's going to return some amount of JSX. This JSX, let's go ahead and do this. I know it's going to be, all these guys will be their own column, and we'll give it a medium breakpoint, and we're going to say it's 4 width long. And we're going to be passed down some props, and going back to our data here on JSON placeholder, each one will have a title. So let's start with that. Actually, you know what? Let's make it even easier. Let's start with their ID. That'll be a number, and we'll confirm if this is working or not. So we'll get props dot. This is where we have to make up the name of our prop we're passing. I'm going to call it a post, and each post will be an object that should have an ID. And at its simplest, that's all we should need to render this guy. But back up here, we're going to now have to use our postcard component. So import postcard from this directory /postcard, like so. Now we can actually use it down here, postcard, like this. And postcard takes a post prop, and this post prop will be just the object of post right here, like this. And again, because it's going to throw us some shade that we don't have a key thrown on this guy, we're going to go ahead and put the key attribute on here. And as you saw earlier, each post had a unique ID called ID. So I'm going to make the key just be equal to post.id. There we go. So now going back to our code here, we got all 100 post IDs now popping up in their own columns. That's pretty dope. Pretty dope. I like it. Going back to my bootstrap on my left-hand monitor here, I'll actually just bring it over so you guys can watch me do this. Going to go ahead and bring in the card here. We're going to bring in, we can use one of these. Yeah, there we go. We're going to copy this guy out. A bit more complicated than what it needs to be, but it'll make sense once you move down the line. So honestly, we're pretty much done in this posts.jsx now. Its job is done. It just makes a fetch to an API endpoint. It gets the information, sets state with it, and renders it. And the actual rendering and displaying happens here. So I know I'm going to need this column MD4, so I'm going to paste the rest of the code here in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and convert all these classes to say class name, so the JSX stops throwing errors at me. And we're going to change up a couple of these. And if you guys recall, I did some destructuring in class on Friday, where I'll do again here. We're going to say let brackets equal this, or not this, just props.post. So this is saying, instead of having to say props.post.id, props.post.userid, props.post.title, props.post.content, I think it was, all we got to do is pull those keys, those properties, off this props.post object, and now we can have access to a shorter term inside there. So I know we had ID, we had user ID, we had a title, and I'm fairly certain it was called content, but let me double check that before I make a fool of myself as usual. And it was /posts was the API endpoint I'm testing. So it's user ID, title, body. Body. Good thing I checked that. So let's change that. Cool. So now we're also going to need to get rid of the style because that's going to break my columns. So we're going to get rid of that. There we go. The card title, as you can imagine, I'm probably going to delete this texture and use something like title. We don't have really a subtitle thing. I'm going to say let's use user ID. So I'm going to say user ID like this. Also, did they camel case it in their code? I can't remember. Ah, they did. So these have to be matching up. So they did user ID camel cased. So I have to make sure that matches up. There we go. And there we go. I'll say user and have their user ID since we don't have a name for them. That works for me. I'm going to comment these guys out for now because I'll be revisiting them in the next lesson. But for this time, we'll leave them there for now. And we don't have content. We have a body. So we'll say body. Okay. I think this guy is now wired up and good to go. I pulled off the ID property, but I'm not actually using it. That's fine at this point. It doesn't really matter. It's just there to show we can do whatever we need. Ha 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 ha. Check that out, y'all. I now have a list of 100 cards that follow the grid layout system here, right? Pretty dope. And check this out. If I click on navbar, it goes back home. It says use the navbar to navigate to your desired page. I click on posts. The post.jsx component loads. It does a component will mount, does a fetch call, it resolves, it renders the cards, and it uses the post card component to render all 100 of these guys in a nice column fashion. So we have now successfully done an API call and rendered a bit of information using some Bootstrap. So I'm going to do a bit of a refactor, and we're going to cover the logic behind it in the next lesson. But for now, here's the idea. I don't want to show the body on this page. What I end up wanting to do is instead, I want to have a button. So I'm actually going to uncomment these guys here. I'm going to delete one of them like so. I want to change this to say show post body, or like see post body, show post body, doesn't matter. So I'm going to get rid of this body paragraph tag here along with the card text that comes with it. I'm going to go check out what it looks like now. Show post body, okay. And honestly, I really like buttons, so I'm going to make this like button primary or something like that. Button primary. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And I can't remember what the Bootstrap class was for making it expand the width of its block. Pff, that was easy. That's just btn-block. Lols. There we go. There we are. Cool. So now we want this guy to eventually go to this post's body. And we can do that without having to hard code it anywhere, and that's where the next lesson is going to come in. So that's where we're going to start talking about match.parameters and things like that, and route parameters, and that's where it does get kind of confusing, so I'm going to save that for the next lesson. Hopefully everything so far we've done is making sense to you guys, and this refactor that I'm starting right here will make sense in the following lesson. So I'll see you guys in just a minute.